Hello. Good morning. Thanks all for coming. I'm Sean Miller, Director for Duke Center for Instructional Technology. Welcome to our 15th annual CIT Showcase. The Duke Center for Instructional Technology helps faculty explore, develop, and evaluate innovative ways to use technology and new pedagogies to meet their teaching needs. One of the ways we do this is by highlighting or showcasing the teaching activities of Duke faculty and staff. And so that's what this event has been about for the past several years. Some of you may know that that CIT is part of Duke Libraries. We've actually held the showcase here twice before, and after they renovated Rubenstein, they invited us back to do the event here. So today I think you're going to have a chance to see all the new things that have happened in the library if you haven't had a chance to do that so far. We purposely planned different sessions in different parts of the library, so hope you'll take advantage of that and take a chance to walk around and experience the new stuff in the library. Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people on our staff that have helped make today possible. Patricia Palick, Seth Anderson, and Elise Mueller were the staff that helped really put this event together, have coordinated everything, and you have them to thank for all the smoothness that you'll experience today. And now let me introduce our keynote speaker. Peter Felten is Assistant Provost for Teaching and Learning, Executive Director of the Center for Engaged Learning, and Professor of History at Elon University. His recent publications include the co-authored books Transforming Students, Fulfilling the Promise of Higher Education, and Engaging Students as Partners in Learning and Teaching. Today, Peter will explore research into the nature and qualities of university experiences that challenge students to develop the knowledge, skills, and commitments that will allow them to thrive in a rapidly changing world. And I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me? How are we doing, Steve? We're okay. Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Come on in if you're one of those people who's standing in the door. There's plenty of room in the front, as always. I'm going to talk to you today for a bit about some of the research I've done with colleagues at Elon. I'm going to ask you to talk some also. If you're in the Overflow Room, good morning. And you can send questions up and comments up through Quinton there. Right? Okay, so the task here is to think a little bit about learning that lasts. And what I want to do is ask 4 questions. I'm not sure if you could see the questions in the back. As a historian, I love rooms like this. As a presenter, I don't love rooms like this. But the 4 questions, and I'm not going to read you lots of slides. Fear not. 4 questions are, what's a university for? What is learning that lasts? What makes learning last? And what can we do? Okay? In about 6 hours, we'll get through that. Everything will be fine. Okay, so the question first is, what's a university for? And if you read about higher education in this country right now, you know the answer is we're doomed, right? Kevin Carey had a really influential book that came out earlier this year called The End of College. And that was sort of an upbeat version of this literature, right? And there's lots of different reasons why we're doomed and the end is near, but they come down to sort of 2 strands of argument. One, and I think it's cool, these are different presses, released these 2 books 5 years apart, and still they use the exact same colors. It's convenient for me. So Academically Adrift, if you know it, it's a big study that says functionally students don't learn very much in college. Now there's a number of issues we could take with the study, but they say students are adrift. They're adrift because they're not working very hard, and because they're not working very hard, and because they're adrift, they're not learning much. College is failing at its fundamental task. So that's one of the reasons why we're told the end is near. Second, this is a brand new book. It came out, actually, I got it last week. Has anybody read this book, Revolution in Higher Education? Well, you should probably, but I can now tell you anything I want and feel safe that you'll know. It's by a technologist, a faculty member and technologist, and he says that technological innovation is going to radically change access to information and the quality of information people can get. In other words, how teaching is going to work in the world is fundamentally going to be changed, not by MOOCs so much as by adaptive learning technologies. right? And so, in other words, there's a revolution coming. The subtitle is How a Small Band of Innovators Will Make College Accessible and Affordable. I think he should also put in there, and venture capitalists should give me money, but... So there's a technology argument for why we're doomed. There's a learning argument for why they're doomed. And implied, especially in DeMillo's book, is an argument about finance, right? That the way we do, the way money works in higher ed is fundamentally flawed. It costs too much for students. States and public entities don't put enough money in. And universities don't have what they need to provide high-quality education, right? So we're doomed for lots of reasons. An old New Yorker cartoon that I like very much. If you can't see it, the end is near. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm a historian by training, and so I know that always in the past, people say we are living in a transformational time. And they're almost always wrong. And so, maybe we are living in a transformational time right now. Maybe not. I'm not sure. But if we really are in a place where students aren't learning very much in college, and where what we do at face-to-face places like Elon or Duke is replaceable by a bunch of robot tutors in the cloud, is what they called them on NPR this morning, maybe we should be doomed, right? Maybe we should. There's a really smart article by someone at a small liberal arts college, Luther College in Iowa in 2013, about the purpose of universities. Let me read just a clip from it. Since there are now innumerable other and cheaper ways to be educated, why are we doing this? Deciding on a clear and important set of goals will not be easy, but colleges cannot afford to kick the can down the road. We each need to figure out what our college is for, right? And I think we may not be in transformational times, but I think this is exactly right. That we need to figure out, no matter what your role is here at Duke or elsewhere, we're having a lot of conversations like this at Elon, what is an education for? The kind of education we provide, what's my role in that? And how do I do that as well as I can, rather than chase the latest fads? Or perhaps do things that we have done in the past that haven't worked so well, right? So universities are for something. I'm going to suggest that universities are for creating learning that really lasts for students. I'll talk about the research I did in a minute, but I want to just get one idea out that you might be thinking about that I want to argue is important but not for today. There's a really lovely book called Make It Stick that came out last year by a number of psychologists. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, but what they say is that there are certain, well, the subtitle, The Science of Successful Learning, right? So you know it's really smart because it's science. And what they say is there are certain things that students can learn, certain strategies that will help them learn things in ways that will last. The strategies, I'll give you the whole summary of the book. Practice retrieving new learning from memory, space out your retrieval practice, and interleave, that's their word, the study of different kinds of problems, right? And you will have learning that lasts. I think their research is persuasive, but I think their research is persuasive about a particular kind of learning or a particular definition of learning, which is about learning tasks and skills and facts, which is very important. I actually think that might be the replaceable part of what universities do. So this is important, but when I'm talking with you today, when I'm asking you to think about learning that lasts, I'm asking you to think not strictly about sort of learning lots of factual knowledge. There's really good guides for that. What I'm going to talk to you about is drawn from a book that a colleague and I published. It's on the back of the handout. There's all of the references I'm going to have are in the back of the handout. It came out from Johns Hopkins 2 years ago, 18 months ago, called Transforming Students, right? And I'll tell you more about the way we did the research in a little bit, but I've been talking too long and you have not. So I want to see what you think about this question of transforming students right now and give you a chance to let the coffee sink in before we get deeper into things. So I'm going to ask you to do this. Just turn to a person next to you. If you haven't introduced yourself, introduce yourself. do this in groups of 3 because I'm not very nice and not going to give you very much time. And everybody, quickly, in 1 or 2 minutes, tell a story about a student who you knew or you know who you think is transformed in higher education, right? Just a quick story about a particular person. It could be a student you've taught, it could be you, could be someone, a friend, a colleague, family member, right? So do that just really quickly, like 1 minute each, and then what you're going to do is abstract from that. So what's that tell you about transformation and transformative learning? Go! Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, folks, I need to bring it back together, please. Okay, so my first question to you, just show of hands, how many of you were able to think of a student who'd been transformed in college or in higher? Whoa. Okay, so that was not the hard part. So lots of stories in the room. That was easy. We don't have time to hear all the stories. It would be really interesting, but we don't have time. I'm curious about insights or questions that raised about sort of the nature of learning that lasts in college. So what did the stories make you think about in general terms about learning that lasts? Does that make sense? Can somebody speak to that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, both of us, we're in global health.
Yeah.
And talked about sort of experiential opportunities
Okay.
that sort of changed the way that a student would interact with, look at the world out of their comfort zone.
Okay, so experiential activities that get students out of their comfort zone, at least in global health, can help students reframe themselves, their education, the world. Okay, so that's one thing folks in the room heard from these stories. What's something else?
And this is for my son who's been studying astronomy in the summer. He got to spend a good chunk of the summer rebuilding this giant telescope.
Okay.
And all the pieces came together for him.
Okay.
The theory and that. So it does tie back to the experiential too.
So experiential, sort of immersive,
Yes.
integrative, all the pieces come together, and I think you probably meant not just literally the telescope pieces came together, but also sort of how astronomy works. It's really bad when you rebuild a telescope and there's that one piece left. Okay, so we've got immersive, integrative, experiential, yeah.
There's also a paradigm that's set it up, is that the students that are more likely to be right and make a difference are the ones who are embracing new technology, social media, and networking beyond the classroom.
Okay, so I don't know if you could hear what he said, but the idea partly is that certain students are more likely to embrace this kind of learning than others. That's a really interesting and important point, right? And then secondly, technology might influence this too, right? Technology can move students out of the classroom or put them in networks or put them in connection with information or ideas that they don't have already, right? So technology can enable. Yeah, one more.
So our group, we've got a law school professor. I teach in China in a medical school program, and he's undergrad. And we were all talking about training students to understand the system, how law is going to be done in the future, how to deal with being a freshman on campus, how to talk to Chinese students about critical thinking and open bibliographic inquiry. So it's more learning the system and getting to know how.
So it's about learning systems and learning contexts and how different pieces fit within a broader context. Yeah, great. Well, you know a lot about this already. So I'll just say any questions and then we'll be done for the, no. So let me tell you about the work we did at Elon. Well, first about transformation. And let me make a point about transformation, and then I'll talk about the book a little bit, and then I'll give you an idea of what we learned from the book and what it suggests for folks who teach. Is that when we think about learning that lasts or learning that transforms, I think often we're talking about two separate but related ideas. One is transformation, is learning that has meaningful, lasting change, right? Transformation also is an ongoing process. And what that process typically is understood to be is aligning what you're doing with your identity. Your identity may not be fixed, but aligning your actions, your beliefs, etc., with your evolving sense of identity, right? So there's a process piece of transformation and there's a product piece of transformation. And the argument we make in the book is that we should think of education as something like a practice room. Dewey uses this analogy too, John Dewey, that what the university should do is work on both of those levels. We should aim to actually transform students, and just as importantly, we should aim to help students understand how they learn and change so that they're capable of doing that after they leave. Because we don't do that good of a job if they're with us. We prepare them really well for the very next thing, and then they have to come back every time they encounter something new, right? So the argument here is that we should think of transformation, learning that lasts, as being about both an outcome and a process. Okay? So what makes learning last? That was the motivating question of this research project, where what we did is we interviewed hundreds of students. We actually interviewed a lot of faculty, we interviewed some parents, we interviewed some alumni. Most of the interviews were at Elon. These are some of the people we interviewed. Almost all the interviews we had permission to use the names of folks, so in some of my quotes I'll have from folks I'll use names. Sometimes we didn't, right? But we interviewed people and we asked them, what did you expect from college? Did you expect to change? And then we asked them to describe changes they experienced. And we tried very hard not to talk about moments of change or process, but just to see where they went. Then we analyzed the heck out of this, connected it up with the literature, and wrote this little book, right? So let me give you just a little sense of two of the themes we heard very often, and then I'll get to the practical part. So one of the things we heard when we asked students, either first years who had just started at university or students who are just about to graduate, what did you expect coming to college? We heard two very common themes. One from a student named Ben Smith. When I came to college, I thought I was pretty set in the way I was, and I didn't think I had much potential to change. At 18, you think you're right about everything, and I didn't think I had much left to learn, right? So that's a very, very common theme. And actually, if you look at research on adolescent development, there we go. I'm pretty cool as I am. The other thing we heard, this is from Eric Brown, who we interviewed a month into his first year of college. He had come in intending to go to medical school. And he'd just had his first couple exams in science, and he said, that made me think about how much I had to change. I remember I just kept thinking, dude, you're not as smart as you think you are. You need something else, right? So there's this interesting paradox of I'm pretty good, I'm pretty set in who I am, except I don't know who I am, right? The other thing we heard a lot was a paradox that Alexander Aston, a higher ed researcher, pointed out years and years and years ago, that when you look at what happens in university, what students do matters immensely, right? We can't learn for them. So students would talk about, it's all about me. But systems matter too, right? And what the institution does and what faculty and staff at the institution do shapes what students do, right? So there's these two things again. Students have to learn on their own in order to learn and change. But what institutions do is set up environments, create relationships, create experiences that are likely to make students learn, right? So what we found was this different angles looking at the same thing. You see very different experiences. What that suggests, and what I'm going to suggest to you today, is there's not a silver bullet. There's not one way to create learning that lasts in some sort of transformational way. That's too complicated of a task. It's too much connected to who individuals are, in what moment, with whom, when, right? So it's super complicated, but it's not all serendipity either, right? We use a phrase in the book that I don't know if we invented it or not, but I like it a lot. What university's job is to create planned serendipity, right? To create experiences where students are more likely to be transformed. To create relationships. To have students engage with ideas and disciplines in ways that are more likely to last, right? So what are the characteristics of those? And you've got a handout that has this. I'll walk you through it and give you some examples that are fairly specific but helpful. But we talk about sort of a cycle, although we didn't want to frame this as one of those cycles where you have to go starting in one place and ending in another. But you move typically from disruption to reflection to verification to integration. And that's what you see when you see people talk about, reflect on, or study learning that really lasts and really changes people, okay? So I'm going to unpack each of these. If we had lots and lots of times, I give you tons of examples. What I'll do in each case is point you to a couple good practices. They're not perfect, but they're good. And point you to one resource, which I think is really interesting to go deeper into this, okay? So, oops, I went the wrong way. So first, disruption. And in our interviews, especially at Elon, where about 75% of our students study abroad, what we heard over and over is what the public health folks said. Study abroad and other experiential things are very disruptive. So this is a student, her name's Larissa Farinetti. Before I spent a semester in Guatemala, I cried when I left my dad at the airport because I was scared I couldn't do it. When I was coming back, I was crying because I didn't want to leave. I was uncomfortable because I had changed in Guatemala and I wasn't sure how the new me would fit in life in the US. She's been disrupted. Later in the interview, she said something really interesting. She said, I had felt that feeling before and I knew this is going to be okay. You're doing the right thing. Even though it doesn't feel right, it's the right kind of wrong. That, for a 21-year-old, is awesome thinking. But that means she's comfortable in disruption, which is very unusual for any human, not just college students. What we suggest you want to look for is productive disruptions. You don't want to just yank the rug out from underneath students or throw them in the deep end or whatever analogy you want it to be and say, you'll learn to swim eventually if you don't drown. So how do we create productive disruptions? Ken Bain did a study of teachers and highly effective teachers about 10 years ago. A lot of you may know his work, what the best college teachers do. And he has a really important point about this kind of productive disruption. He says the key to understanding the best teaching isn't in particular practices or rules, but in the attitudes of the teachers, in the faith in their students' abilities, in their willingness to take their students seriously and let them assume control, right? Students are the ones who get disrupted. Our job is to trust that if we put them in a productively disruptive space, they can handle it, right? So the characteristics, one way of thinking about this from the research is that 3 things are essential to get to productive disruption. You need time and effort on the part of the student. You need meaningful challenge. It should be meaningful within a discipline or whatever they're studying, but it should be meaningful to them personally too. Perhaps that's because they're really interested in this chemical reaction, but perhaps it's meaningful for another reason. And then you need appropriate feedback, guidance, models, right? So how do you do this? Supporting disruption. I told you we'd go fast. I think there's four things to think about in your own teaching and your own work with students or in your own learning. One is having clear expectations. You're going to change in this class, in this program. When you go abroad for this public health immersion experience, it's going to be disruptive, but you're going to make it through, right? So one thing is having clear expectations of what students need to do, what students can expect. Second is asking big questions, especially disciplinary questions. I think way too often in my own teaching, in the past, and in many introductory classes in particular, we hide the ball. History isn't interesting because so many things happened in the past, right? But if you go into a lot of introductory history classes, it's as if what you need to know historians, think about history, is to know that a lot of stuff happened and be able to repeat it back. History is interesting because it helps us think about the world and how humans work. So how do you foreground those questions? Because those are the disruptive questions. Then focus more on process than outcomes. Students are really used to preparing for exams and giving you the right answer. Right answers often don't lead to disruption. And then the last is to make space for emotion, or this is a great book that came out last year by Mark Carnes. He's a historian, so you know he's smart. Mind's on fire, but the subtitle is important: How Role Immersion Games Transform College. What the book is mostly about is something called Reacting to the Past, which is a pedagogy that he and others developed at Barnard College. Month-long, face-to-face, immersive role-playing games for undergraduates, set in particular moments in time. It's the most awesome pedagogy I've ever taught with. It's so cool, it always works, and it really disrupts students, because they have to argue from a particular perspective, not their own, and they can win or they can lose, right? But there's a lot of really good stuff in the technology world about sort of video game design and how you could take advantage of creating challenging environments where students are engaged personally in what they're doing and where they can fail, but the cost of failure is low, right? So, and what Carnes says is what we've done in higher education is make this mistake. He says traditional age college students love subversive play. They're interested in hierarchies, they're interested in rules, they're interested in competition, and they want to bend and break those things. He says in our classrooms we don't create any of that, but outside of our classrooms, in athletics, in fraternities and sororities, in et cetera, that's all there is, right? And so students put a lot of their energy and time into things outside of the classroom. He says we need to bring subversive play back into the classroom as a way to disrupt if you can't take your students to Guatemala for a semester. So, part one of this process is to think about disrupting, creating productively disruptive environments. The second is to create moments and skills around reflection. To tell you why this is important, this is one of my least favorite things a student ever said to me. Studying about one of my classes, studying and talking about poverty made me so depressed I had to go shopping. Right? So here I am trying to disrupt her and getting her thinking hard about these issues. And so she went and bought a purse to feel better. She did, right? She showed it to me. It was apparently a very nice purse, but I'm like, damn. Anyways, the point is experience alone does not lead to learning. Experience plus reflection leads to learning. And so when you're thinking about reflection, there's really two things again. There's reflecting as a way to learn, and there's learning the skill of reflecting so that I can be more effective on my own, right? And as we work with students and as we teach students, we need to work on both of those, right? How do we help you learn from this particular experience, and how do we help you develop the capacities to reflect so you can learn more effectively from all those other experiences that we didn't set up or that we can't control? Because one of the things we learned in this study, it's not surprising, is that the most powerful educational experiences for many students aren't the things we design. They're the things that happen on the margins, or in surprise, or in trauma, things like this. To give you a quick story, when we started this project, we started by interviewing some students we knew fairly well because we wanted to work out the questions and all this. So I was interviewing a student named Jill. She's in the book. She'd worked in my office for 2 years. I thought I knew her really well. And so I'm leading the interview. I'm feeling pretty good about this. And about 5 minutes into the interview, I say, Jill, the research says first semester freshman year, often something important happens in the first couple of weeks that sort of shapes a student trajectory. Did anything like that happen to you? And she looks at me and says, yeah, I was raped during freshman orientation. I never told anybody until this past year about it. And then she talked about this. And my little brain said, but I've known you for 2 years. You had this, I know you as a student, except I don't, right? So more complicated things are happening and disrupting. So how do we help students learn to reflect? The good news is Jill got really good care and spoke as a senior at the Take Back the Night rally. But reflection, the point here, is that reflection is really powerful as a skill. Research on reflection, big analysis of this research, says it's uniquely positively associated with darn near everything we're trying to do in higher education, right? It's worthwhile. Let me give you an example of reflection that's a little more positive. It's another study abroad example. I noticed this when I was looking at these. A lot of the book is not so study abroad, but the really rich examples here work out as study abroad pretty well. So this is from a student who's reflecting back as a senior, saying as a first-year student she took an anthropology class. Part of what they studied was body art and tattooing. And she said, I've always felt that's so gross, bikers get tattoos. But we learned that across many cultures it's supposed to represent a turning point in your life, a physical reminder of the point where you were when you got it. And then she said, 2 years later, I spent a semester in London, and it changed how I understood the world. And I realized this was my transformative moment. I know this is what I want to do with my life. So I went and I got a tattoo. It's just a little thing, a North Star on my ankle. But every time I see it, it's part of London with me. It's like a promise to myself. Right? So here's an example of a student reflecting back on something she learned 3 years before and connecting it to something personally meaningful to her. That's the kind of both outcome and skill we want. I'm not sure we need tattoos as proof, as the father of 2 children, but still, if my daughter got a tattoo and explained it that way, I would be okay. My wife would kill her, but I'd be okay. So I'm supporting reflection. What can we do? I think there's 4 things here. One is encourage and reward questioning and uncertainty. Far too often in my own teaching, in the past, and in a lot of classes, we reward certainty and answers. That doesn't tend to lead to good reflective thought. It doesn't lead to good reflective practices. Focusing on what's meaningful again, asking students, why does this matter? Recognizing the power of peer-to-peer. One of the things we heard in the study over and over is the really powerful moments students describe more often are with peers. They start with us, with a question we ask or a reading or something like this. But the transformational moment the student identifies is when they're talking to their peers, right? And then help students develop reflective habits. Let me give you a simple technique that's genius and works in almost everywhere you can think of in higher ed. It's from a book called How Learning Works. You may know it. It's on the list. And the idea, I learned of it from Carnegie Mellon. They're called exam wrappers. Because the idea is students learn a lot studying for exams, but then typically they get the exam, they look at the grade, they toss it, they curse you, they go on about their ways, right? An exam wrapper, when you give back the exam, you give out a little worksheet. a questionnaire that says on it, so look at your performance on this exam. First of all, how'd you study? What kinds of things did you do to study, right? You're not grading this, you're just asking them to reflect on this. Then look at your performance on the exam. What did you tend to do well, or what kinds of mistakes did you tend to make? And then what's that suggest about how you should study next time, right? So it's a really simple technique. The folks at Carnegie Mellon have done this lots and lots and can demonstrate that certain kinds of student reflection on exam wrappers leads to better performance on future tests. So what you're doing with this is taking a moment that should be reflective for students. I just got feedback on my performance. And you're prompting them to turn it into a reflective moment. Because we know most of them don't know how to do that, right? So you're developing a skill and a habit there. Okay, so we've got disruption, then you reflect on it. Verification, the idea, this one maybe is the one that feels weirdest to people sometimes. The idea is you actually have to act on what your insights are now. You have to sustain change in some way. So an example from a student, Olivia Hubert-Allen, a media student, Steve. So she had an internship in London in a field that was really competitive. She calls it snappy. And she realized she needed to change how she was as a person. She says, I used to sort of float through things. And I realized if I wanted to be a professional in this field, I had to act differently, right? That's taking ideas and putting them into action. What we say in the book and what we find is what you really need to get to verification is two things. You need purpose and you need action connected, right? If you just change your behavior but you don't know why, it tends to be fleeting. If you just change your intention but you don't change your behavior, you haven't really transformed, right? So it's the combination of purpose and action together that leads to the kind of learning that lasts. Okay? So to get to verification, another thing we're really bad at in higher education is encouraging students to be patient and persistent, to stick with things, right? To fail and to try again. And then the second, and this is probably even more important, this is where technology often comes in as a powerful tool, is create public opportunities for both action and reflecting on purpose. Let me give you a really concrete example of that, and then I'll give you an abstract set of examples from this. And I love this example because I think lots of institutions do this kind of thing, and most of us don't do it as well as we could. So when the earthquake happened in Haiti, 2011, I think, many institutions did things like had food drives or made meals. There's these groups that come together and you put beans and rice and stuff in a little bag and you make 1 million meals, and your institution, everybody feels really good about themselves. They did an activity like this after the earthquake in Haiti at the University of Illinois in the main gym, right? So there's 1,000 students in there and they're making these meals and doing this stuff, right? And this is great and everybody feels good about it. But what they did is they put butcher paper up around the walls and markers, and they asked students to write on the walls, on the paper, why they were doing what they were doing, right? And what they found is they left the paper up for more than a week. Because even after the event was over, which was a day, people kept coming back and reading everything the students had written. And what they were seeing is that lots of different motivations were in the room. Some people were religiously motivated, some people were motivated for non-religious reasons. Some people were assigned for a class, some people weren't, right? But it was putting this kind of connection, their action and their purpose, out there. So how do you do that in your own work? I don't know exactly. I think portfolios are sort of one tool. Lots of web-based tools. Twitter can even work in some ways for this, of asking students to be public about what you're doing and why you're doing it. If you don't know the Catalyst for Learning work, funded by a big FIPSI grant and a number of other grants, it's 25 different institutions doing research together on e-portfolios. Lots of different kinds of institutions, really strong models of what this kind of work is. And what the e-portfolio folks associated with Catalyst for Learning say is that the portfolio too often is thought of as only a product. And what they're really interested in is what they call folio thinking. The idea of thinking about how do I reflect on all the various things I've done and pick out the most important or the most interesting or the most powerful or the ones I want to continue to think about. And how do I explain those in a portfolio? Right? Make sense? So there's tools we can use, often tech tools like portfolios, to support this process of getting from action to sustained action. Last but not least is integration. It's the putting all the pieces together, both of the telescope and of astronomy, and getting from how you act to how you are, right? So it's integrating it into you. Two ideas for you about integration. If you've read the literature on integrative learning, I don't know if anybody has. I'm doing a big research project on it right now. We need lots of smart people writing about integrative learning because it's really hard. And a lot of the literature is descriptive. It doesn't really get us very far. But I think two key ideas to me here is one is that integration is a narrative task. It's a task of storytelling, right? So it's how do you integrate things? How do you explain how it all fits together? We're humans. We do that by telling stories in communities. So we're telling Dad about what happened when I did the telescope, or we're talking to classmates about this public health experience we had, or we're thinking about systems and how the law works, right? So there's a narrative task that suggests there's things we need to do to teach students about how to tell stories and how to hear stories and how to ask questions about stories, right? Again, tech can be a really powerful tool there. A second thing is that I think this is a design thinking sort of problem. It's a wicked problem. I don't know if you know John Kokel's book about design thinking. He's one of these design thinking people, and I know design thinking is very hip and maybe it's even sort of passé, but I like his book about wicked problems because the idea is there are problems that are not solvable problems. But that doesn't mean they're not worthwhile problems. They're wicked because they're really interesting and they're really hard. And so what Kokel suggests what you need to do is, he says there's this 4-step cycle. You empathize. You first think about what kind of problem is this and why does it matter? Then you try things out, you test them, and then you commit to choosing one of them and acting in that way, and then you go back and repeat, right? And so helping students see the process of putting together meaning in their education as that kind of process. Just give you an example of what that means. I know folks at Duke have been doing a lot of work on advising and things like this. Where we're going at Elon in advising is the standard practice had been sit down first-year students and have them develop a 4-year plan, right? And sketch out where they're going to go over the 4 years and when they study abroad and all this. And that is very, very sensible if you know where you're going. And it's deeply horrifying if you don't, right? And so what we're playing with now is saying to students, sketch out a couple different 4-year plans. What might you want to do? What are a couple different versions of you 4 years from now, right? And what happens if you follow this path? And what happens if you follow that path, right? So let them empathize and prototype their experience at the university or their career afterwards, right? Instead of saying, what are you going to do? Okay. So let me give you an example of what integration looks like. It's from a student named Sarah Gould. She's one of the good guys in the world. She teaches at a Title I school, a high poverty school in Baltimore. She's been doing it for almost 10 years. And she came to Elon and she wanted to be a teacher because she'd seen those Lifetime after school specials, of heroic teachers and all this. And she said, though, early in her education career, she would say to herself, I could do this, maybe, I don't know. That's the nervousness and the lack of confidence set in, she said. And then she actually started teaching as a student teacher and all this, and she thought, I can't do it. It's harder than I thought. I'm not this person. And then she said, one day my senior year, we had visiting teachers come into class from a very successful Title I school. As I was sitting there, I was thinking, okay, they're doing it. It's not impossible. Then I got to the point of, okay, I can do this. Now I want to do this, right? So she's integrated this. What she dreamt about doing but wasn't sure she could. She's gotten the skills, and now she's saying, I want to do this, right? She's put the pieces all together. in a way that really lasts. This is super hard. Many, many humans don't get to this. I think there's really two things broadly we can do to support integration. Cultivate it. Talk about it as an expectation. Show students examples of how to do this. What Sarah's teacher had done, bringing in successful teachers at Title I schools, saying, here's examples of people who have integrated. And then model how people put things together. Many of us as scholars, I think, do a terrible job of this, where we, in my own writing, let me make fun of myself for a moment. And in my own writing, you write a book, you have like 100 drafts of this book, right? But we only show the final sort of pretty version to people. I have an 11-year-old son, and 2 years ago he had a big writing project for school, and he worked on it, and I said, okay, so you've got a first draft done, that's great. Now, and I took him over to my computer, and I'm like, so here's the thing I'm working on, let me show you the latest draft, and there's all these drafts and everything. And he said, okay. And he said, so can I just turn my paper in? I'm like, no, that's your first draft. And he looked at me and he goes, but Dad, I'm a good writer. And so, showing the process that good writers revise. Good writers struggle. Good writers try and try and try. Showing those sorts of integrative processes we take, the mistakes we make, can really help students think about integration for themselves. A really cool example of this, I don't know anybody at this program, I just read about it, and the more I read about it, the more I think it's totally awesome, is Designing to Make a Difference, which is in mechanical engineering at Ohio University. And it is, if we had a long time, I could tell you all about it. But what they do, it's a year-long senior capstone experience for mechanical engineering, right? They do projects with community partners to solve real problems in the community. That's pretty cool. But wait, they also get feedback from first-year mechanical engineering students at Ohio University about their ideas as they're developing their prototypes and all this, right? So they're working with first years in their program, they're working with community partners and with engineers in the community, and they're developing real stuff. And the outcomes of this program are amazing. Students, anyways, the Kramer article that's on the citation is really great, really powerful as a way of a department putting together an integrative capstone experience that's deep and really layered, right? So we can do this. The point here is there's not one way to get to integrative learning. It's not easy. I wish I could tell you the trick, but if you could think about these four things and think about your own work and where do you intersect with students and when? Is your job to disrupt them in productive ways? Is your job to help them integrate? Are you in relationship with them enough for a sustained enough time you can actually try to move them all the way through this? Sort of what are you trying to do with them? That's the question for you. So I want to get you back in your pairs to think about what you can do with this information. So back to your small groups. Think about something you could do that's sparked by what we've talked about this morning. Ideally something concrete, something specific. You're not going to be able to transform all your students right away, but it might be think some more about that immersive semester. Okay, so what is it? What might you do? With whom? When? How? I'll give you a few minutes. We'll talk about some examples of that and some questions. We'll be almost done. Okay? Ready? Go.
So we have plenty of time.
You don't have to be done until 10:15?
No. Oh, but this time I'm going to run down the center.
Okay.
And then if you want to tell people to raise their hand, I'll try to get the mics to them.
Okay.
I just couldn't.
No, it's fine.
But,
Okay.
Yeah, there are some people in the overflow room, it turns out. So.
And we're good till 10:15, and people know that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
There's a break between 10:15 and like 10:30 or 10:35, so they have plenty of time to get there.
Okay, so I can give them time to talk.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, one more minute. Okay, can we come back together? Okay.
Hello.
Hello. And we do have a bunch of people downstairs now in the overflow room, so as we have discussion here, two things. One, please use the mic that Sean has so that they can hear you downstairs, as well as everybody up here. And we may get questions that come up from the depths, too. And that would be really cool. So first, examples. Could you think of something you could do concretely that might help your students learn in ways that might last? Anybody willing to share an example or two? Yeah, please. And if you could say what specifically, what context you're teaching in.
Well, I teach design, but I was thinking of it in a more general terms. You kept giving examples of out-of-country experiences, and I tried to translate that in my mind to in location-based, which is really you're saying off-road learning. And so even your example, though, with the freshmen saying come up with 2 plans, imagine if we gave permission to freshmen to say, you have to come up with an off-road plan for your freshman year. I know you might want to be an engineer, but for this year, I'd like you to try 3 things you've never done, inside or outside of this classroom. I mean, I don't think we give permission to do what you're talking about.
Right. No, I think that's a great idea. And not just give permission, but to assign it. And say, no, I want to see 4 different versions of you. Here, think about 4 different versions. That might be hard. But come up with different ones. I think that's great.
I'm in global health, and we have students who spend a long time overseas, et cetera. And we were just discussing that in one of the projects we do, we get monthly reports from the student. They send us, I mean, it's required. They reflect on what's happened socially, everything besides their work. And there are other things that both of us do where we don't require that of our students. And we thought that's a much better way to continue the conversation. I mean, we just sort of hope everything's okay and they'll call us if it's a problem. Now, there are staff people that are communicating with them, so it's not like they're out there by themselves. But nevertheless, it would provide us more opportunity to have more conversation about what they're learning and how they're learning.
That's great. Can I add something to that? Something a very wise writing teacher named Bill Condon, who, if you're in writing, you may know him, taught me a long time ago. And technology can help with this a lot. So let's say you have them write in some sort of blog format or something for these reports, right? Maybe it's public and open to the world, maybe it's not. But you assign everybody to do that. And Bill says you don't actually have to read them all. You just have to read some of them some of the time and keep bringing back into the conversation. When I was reading your blog the other day, and everyone's like, oh, he read all the blogs, right? and so what you're doing, and not to be sneaky, but to say the point of this reflecting and these reporting is really for them to capture their ideas, and secondarily for us to understand the experience. That's why we don't assign it all the time. Except, perhaps our priority should be for them to develop the habit and the skill to do that kind of reflecting, and sometimes for us to drop in and use it, right? So I like that idea a lot, of assigning them all to do it, but that doesn't mean you have to read it all or grade it all. It helps if they think it's valuable. Another example?
Someone else have one? Did I miss somebody?
That's all right.
All right.
Okay. Anything from down below?
No.
Are there any questions that this raised? Yeah.
So, first I want to clarify, I'm not a law professor, I'm a law technologist. Thank you. And I just like to say, I come at this from two different places. One from the side of the disruption, and the other side from a student, because I'm also a doctoral student. And so, listening to these things that have been said here today, there are things that come to mind. One, not everybody learns the same way. The amount of time that you have as a student, you're busy, 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 and then there's a process of what is it that you're focusing on. And most students, and I can say this for myself specifically, is the outcome. So what I'm supposed to accomplish in the time that is allotted. The debate in higher education about how much it costs and, how long students are taking and, what types of students there are. And even more so that there are more non-traditional students coming to college. So factoring all of those things that you said into this process, how do you see that affecting people that are not just straight down the middle?
Great question. And that's all the more reason why there's no one way to do this. We have to be very thoughtful about it, and we have to be very careful about what we mean by disruption and how we do it, right? Or how we try to provoke it. Because what's disruptive for an 18-year-old may not be the same thing that's disruptive for a 28-year-old veteran, or may not be disruptive for a 40-year-old single mom, right? And so part of this is thinking about who your students are and what's meaningful to them and what's lasting and what can change for them. Second is to think about different ways to have, I can't remember, the design person used a word that was really nice, off-road experiences or embedded experiences or immersive experiences for lots of different kinds of students. Because at Elon we work with so many traditional age students and so many of them go abroad, it's easy to find examples from study abroad. But if I'm working at a community college, for example, and I used to teach at a community college, a lot of those students could not spend a semester abroad. Their lives would not allow it, even if their finances would, right? And so saying what we do here at this college is we send students abroad to disrupt them, is really saying we're only trying to do learning that lasts for certain students. So how, let me try to say this as articulately as I can. One of the advantages of having non-traditional students is that they bring all of that expertise and experience into the classroom. And so how do we take advantage of that and see that as an asset rather than as a deficit these students are bringing? Because I think, actually, sometimes one of the problems at Elon is if you have 25 18-year-olds from upper middle class backgrounds, we have a fairly homogeneous conversation set of experiences. When you have a 28-year-old and a 40-year-old and a 17-year-old, et cetera, in the room, you've got a richer set of experiences. You might be able to do things in that environment that you can't do when you have only traditional age students. Does that make sense? So think about who your students are and what their goals are, and what's possible for them. And I don't mean possible standards, I mean possibly disruptive for them. I don't need to teach an Iraq War veteran that the world is a big, complicated place, right? I do need to teach some 18-year-olds that. Great question. Other questions? Yeah.
Can you just define a non-traditional student?
Yeah. In an undergraduate setting, officially, the typical definition of a traditional student is 18 to 22 years old and residential on the campus or in the environment of the college or university. So anybody who is not that. Now, if you look at statistics, 45% of undergraduates in this country go to community colleges. Almost none of them are residential. So almost by definition, most students, we're in this weird place where we say things like traditional student, but we actually don't mean majority student. Right? But again, thinking about who we teach and what's going to be disruptive to them, and recognizing the power of their lives outside of class. Yeah.
I appreciate your answer to the question about what is a university for.
Yeah.
But a lot of the students in my classes don't share that same view.
Mm-hmm.
So a university is to get a degree that will allow them to get into the best med schools or law schools, etc. So,
dude, I got into Duke. I'm really good at school, right? Let me just do school, right? One thing, I don't know how to do that well. I can tell you some of the things I try to do. And there's a really, really cool project I would suggest actually you look at. It's called the Transparency in Teaching and Learning in Higher Education project. I think that's the name of it. It's based at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And the idea, there was just a Chronicle piece about this, but there's a better article about it in an AAC, a new journal called Liberal Education from about 4 or 5 years ago. Transparency, UNLV, and you'll find it. And the idea there is that what that project suggests, and now they've got data from, I think it's 7 or 9 institutions they've done this big study, that if we as faculty are transparent with students about both our purposes and our pedagogies, why, for example, in the science class, I'm having you talk to each other, we get better outcomes. And we get better outcomes, I think, because students understand that I'm not asking you, smart kid, in a science lecture to talk to a dumb kid sitting next to you so that you can teach them. I'm asking you to do this because the research in science education is really, really clear that peer instruction is better for all students, right? You may not have experience doing this because you didn't need to do it in high school, you haven't done it before, but look at this research. Everybody learns more when you're confronting your own misconceptions and you're solidifying and verifying your thinking, right? So the Transparency Project says we need to be clear with students and not just do stuff to them, but turn teaching and learning into something we do with them. I think that helps. Does that mean they're all automatically going to buy in? I don't know. I can tell you early in the talk I mentioned this thing, reacting to the past, which is not something you do in large science classes. It's these immersive role-playing games. But one of the things they do in reacting games, which I think is really clever, and I keep trying to think about how it can apply in all of my classes, is they very intentionally create for students what they call a liminal moment early in the game, where the student has to commit to her role publicly. You know, and now I am someone in the French Revolution, or I am the Wanli Emperor in Ming China, right? This is who I am. And when they do that, then the whole rest of the game gets much easier because they're in it, right? And I think too often, in many of my classes at least, there's not that kind of moment where students are committing to learning anything or that this matters to them, right? So how do we create opportunities for students to say, this matters to me and why it matters? And if it matters just so you can get into med school, awesome. Let me show you what research says the best ways to learn to do well in the MCAT are. You know what? That means actually talking to other humans. It does, right? But it's a challenge. I think one last point on that, which is the more we can do this together, the better. Any one faculty member or any one staff member is going to have a really hard time working with students, all students, the diversity of students at any institution, all the way through this, right? But if we could set up the expectation, if what it means to study global health at Duke means you're going to have disruptive experiences, you're going to learn to reflect on them and make sense of them, you're going to connect those to how you behave and integrate that into who you are as a professional and as a human, and we do that together, you stand a much better chance of having a lot of your students or all of your students transformed than if that's this individual project of one of you or another. Makes sense? Let me close, because I think we're at that point, with just two thoughts. The first one back to the disruption comment from the beginning that we're doomed. The Carnegie Foundation, 3 people from the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching put a book out 4 years ago, and this, to me, is just a key line in the book. Educational innovation today invites, even requires levels of preparation, imagination, collaboration, and support that are not always a good fit, to say the least, for the inherited routines of academic life. If we have these broad goals that are more than simply factual learning that could be replaced by a smart tutor in the cloud, robot tutor in the cloud, we need to act that way. And that may force us to think differently about how we teach, who we work with, how students work with us. Second, this is from a different project, so I can't quote the student. I think some faculty are so focused on getting stuff done they don't pay attention to their students, who I think are the most valuable resources in a classroom. So it's back to me to this point of how do we do this work with our students? And say to them, part of being a Duke student is that you're going to change. In fact, I used to work at Vanderbilt, and the guy there, philosophy professor, Lou Outlaw, I don't know if anybody knows him, he's from Starkville, Mississippi, philosopher, and he would get up in front of the freshman parents. He was associate provost for undergraduate, whatever, affairs or something, and he'd get in front of the parents and he would say, you know what, your kids are going to call you and say, this is hard, they're making me do things I can't do, I don't know how to do, I'm uncomfortable. And Lou said, you should be nice to them and you should hang up and say thank you. Because you're not paying $250,000 to send your kid here so we can give them back to you the way they came. Right? They're coming to Duke expecting to change, maybe not knowing what that means, wanting to change. So how do you help them see that we're in this together, right? And students are our allies in this work. That's my last thought. So thanks so much. Have a great conference. And check out the references. There's a break, and then there's sessions.